I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I am really excited to be here with these panelists and to have a discussion. Just a couple things of note here. We are deliberately making this into more of a conversational style because I think one of the whole purposes of this panel is an ability to try to learn about and hear ideas and challenges that people doing work in larger movements have, and how that can also inform how we do our work and whatnot. And I will want to say that one of the reasons that I was inspired to try to put together a panel like this was this feeling, and it's a feeling that I've had for the last couple years, which is this idea that immigration and immigration rights as a movement we're stalling. We're in some ways it's a feeling of dread. We're in this constant feeling of dread. We're going to be dreading this coming election year, and it's dreading every time a budget is going to get announced, and we're dreading about what kind of cuts are going to happen and whether or not asylum is going to be what we think it not only should be, and it's a far away from that, but what we actually even have now. And that feeling of dread is a feeling also of not really trying to figure out, I think there was a little bit of discussion here earlier about what the long game is. What is our vision? What is it that we want in terms of when we say we want a better, more just immigration system? What does that actually mean? And how does that impact? And I am privileged to know a couple other people on this panel, and I think hearing about how other movements and discussions, gender justice, labor movement, human rights generally, international human rights, or the death penalty, I feel as if there's a lot of rich, fertile ground for a good discussion. So would you guys like me to do a short introduction, or would you guys want to do an introduction yourself? How about I do just a really short introduction, and then what I am going to suggest that we do is I would like for you guys to introduce who you are and then be more specific about what it is that you do. Instead of focusing on titles so much, what does your day-to-day work look like and how you think your day-to-day work kind of connects to the larger picture, if that's okay. All right, so to my left is Christy Hall, and she is a staff attorney at Gender Justice. She also received an Attorney of the Year, and she's been gotten quite a bit of recognition for her work in the area of not just gender and reproductive justice, but also trans rights as well. And to her left is Rena Wong, who I consider a good friend. And I love how she puts it on her bio. She is a Chinese American by way of Mexico. So I think it's always fun to be around Rena and to know that, when she's a fluent Spanish speaker, and to also get that sort of bit of surprise when they find out. She also got into labor work, and I know this because during her time at UCLA was the start of the Los Angeles janitor strike and doing that sort of work. Amy Berquist is an attorney with the Advocates for Human Rights. She's also a commissioner on the Minnesota Commission on Civil Rights. She has done quite a bit of international work at the UN, working and focusing on sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as rights of non-citizens and of the death penalty. And so I just want to go ahead and ask, well, we've got the titles out of the way. What does your actual workday look like, and how do you feel it connects to this larger idea or movement that you may or may not consider yourself part of?
Yeah, so I'll start. My name is Christy Hall, and I work at Gender Justice, which is kind of a unique nonprofit here. It's located in St. Paul. And we do policy work, we do education, and we do litigation under one roof. And my role in that is I spend most of my day suing people. So currently, I am preparing for oral arguments at the Minnesota Court of Appeals in 3 cases. One case involving a pharmacist who denied emergency contraception to our client in a rural pharmacy in Minnesota. Another of which is a trans athlete who is a powerlifter who was told that she could not do powerlifting because she is trans. I'm doing that oral argument. And then I am also doing oral argument in a sexual harassment case against the University of Minnesota. So thanks for having me here anyway. And preparing also for litigation in the school context on trans rights, defending our victory on abortion access in the Minnesota courts. Currently, that is at the Court of Appeals as well. And just then strategizing with the rest of the team about how we make progress on our issues in the electoral context, in the court context, and in the public education, hearts and minds of people context. And I provide my expertise and listen to their expertise, and then people higher level than me make decisions about what strategies we pursue. And that's what my day-to-day looks like.
So hi, I'm Rena Wong. So our union represents 17,000 meatpacking and grocery, retail workers. So like Cub Foods, Lunds Byerly's, Kowalski's, the co-ops, Hormel, who've in this last year have all come to the brink of strike over our contract negotiations. Those are the members of our union, and I have the privilege of helping to be their organizer, to work with workers and help advise, but to give them space to lead, to have control, to have agency in their lives, to figure out how they fight for the wages and the benefits and what they need at their jobs to take care of themselves, their families, and to have a good and safe work environment. And so, I also have the honor to then work with all of those worker leaders and strike captains and all of the staff and young organizers like Rebecca, who's here, who actually helped organize 1,000 people onto the streets of Austin on Labor Day, which is the largest labor action that Austin, Minnesota has seen since the P9 strike, which was amazing. And those members in meatpacking, as folks I don't know if folks know or not, but they are majority new immigrants. Those members are immigrants, refugees, come from all over the world. The plant we represent in JBS has like 50-something languages alone within that one plant, within that JBS plant in Worthington, Minnesota. And so, we as a labor union see ourselves as part of a larger justice movement, and that none of us are free until we all are, because the struggles of workers and of immigrant workers in particular is very real in this country and very real in Minnesota, despite how we often say Minnesota is an exception, right, in a lot of ways, and it is exceptional in so many ways. But for immigrant workers, the challenges are very real. And, a thing I talk about all the time is this work that we do together around immigration and pathway to citizenship. When we take over all of the food systems and we strike them all, we will probably get immigration reform in the whole country. So it is very much interconnected, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today to talk about how we build power together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Berquist. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work at the Advocates for Human Rights. When I describe my job, I describe myself as a megaphone. My role is really not to speak for others, but to help amplify the voices of other people, whether it's the clients that the Advocates for Human Rights represents who are seeking asylum, whether it's our partners around the world seeking to abolish the death penalty or to address other human rights violations. My job is to help equip them so that their voices can be heard. And in a lot of countries, and this may not resonate with the United States audience, but in a lot of countries, the first part may resonate. A lot of countries, our partners feel like their voices aren't heard by their governments. They don't feel like their government is responsive, but they do get leverage at the United Nations or at regional human rights mechanisms. And some of those governments are very attentive to and perceptive about what the United Nations is saying about human rights violations in their countries. And my role as the megaphone is to make sure that their voices get heard by the people in power at the United Nations so that they can put external pressure on their governments better to respect human rights. So that's basically what my role is, which is really exciting because it empowers them. At least I hope it empowers them. It's really amazing to see our clients briefing UN experts about human rights violations that cause them to flee their home countries. And it's just amazing to see these people who know what's going on, know what the problems are, help educate experts so that those experts can wield their power for good. In terms of a typical day, that's really a hard thing to describe. I might be, conducting a training. I might be helping to draft or edit a report. I might be working with pro bono attorneys who are helping collaborate with some of our partner organizations, or I might be responding to emails that come out of Blue. I had a call yesterday with the Coalition for Somali Human Rights Defenders. They're based in Somalia. They're human rights defenders that are trying to address human rights violations in that conflict-torn country. And they wanted help. They wanted that megaphone to help them. They wanted to bring complaints to the United Nations. They're like, how do we do that? Help give us the tools to do that. So every day is a little bit different, and we get these, sometimes random requests coming in, and our job is to see if we have the capacity to help amplify those voices.
Great. So another aspect of this is I think all of you are working in spaces in which there are large national and in some cases international events and movements and things that are happening at such a huge, sometimes kind of overwhelming basis. How does that impact your work, and how are you able to continue to do the work, and be able to keep focused on doing your work as part of when there are these, what can feel like sort of these large and almost just these big giant walls coming at you. And I just want to hear how is it that you're able to keep doing the work that you are in that context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I will start, and I guess we'll go down if that makes sense. So I think, and I guess I want to talk about abortion specifically, because it's been kind of an interesting trajectory, having been doing this work I've been at Gender Justice for 12 years, and the organization has been around for 13 years, so we're very young. But we came into the work on abortion in a very different context than we are in now. And that context was, you had a United States Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade, that had been gradually chipped at and eroded forever, and the situation on the ground was dire. And yet, it didn't feel like anybody acted like the situation on the ground was dire. Everybody was sort of pretending that the US Supreme Court will continue to look after our interests, right? We can just make do with all of these abortion restrictions that are in place, that are massive barriers to access for people who need it. And one of the things that we felt we needed to do is make a really honest assessment of where there was a path for change And we felt like the path for change on abortion was in state court in Minnesota. And we are a state-based organization, so like we can make that strategic choice that like, no, we're not gonna file an abortion lawsuit in federal court. That's stupid, don't do that. But that there was a pathway potentially to create positive change in state courts. And so in around 2000, we were having these conversations during the 2016 election and before the 2016 election. And after the 2016 election, it's like, at that point, you have to be like, you have to not, you have to really fail to comprehend your strategic situation to feel like there's a possibility for change in the federal courts. There just wasn't. And so we said, okay, well, we are going to file a lawsuit in state court, and we worked with partners in the Lawyering Project who had, a lot of expertise. And we are going to ask the Minnesota state courts to strike down every single abortion restriction in the state. They are all unconstitutional under our state constitution. We have this decision on the books. It hasn't been enforced in 20 years because everybody's afraid to try and enforce it in the courts, and we're just gonna ask them to do it. And fighting to get that lawsuit filed, even among our allies, was outrageously hard. But we did it anyway. And when the decision Dobbs v. Minnesota came out from the United States Supreme Court in, I always get the timing wrong, June of 2022, it feels like a million years ago. Literally 2 weeks later, our lawsuit in state court was successful, and the district court judge in Ramsey County enjoined all but one of Minnesota's abortion restrictions. And then subsequently, we were able to get for the first time, and this is not, like, I'm not taking credit for this, but Minnesota was able to get in place for the first time in its history a majority in our state, state Congress that was interested in reproductive justice. And like the context that we're in now on that issue is wildly different than what it was before. And I guess what I want to say about this is that you have to make like an honest decision about where the systems have totally failed you and cannot be counted on anymore to help you make change, and where you do have a path for change, and then you have to just do it. I don't know. Yeah, good.
So I've been an organizer for 21 years, 22. It's been 22 years almost. Geez, I'm old. And there is a moment right now in our country that I have not seen in these 22 years until now, in these last few years. And there is a moment right now where workers really are standing up, that the divide between those who have and those who have not is so large, and that people feel it. They feel it in their whole being, in their whole body, every day going to work. And so we have a moment right now in our country that is unlike what I've seen in these 20-something years before. And it's amazing. I mean, I think you all have seen it. You all have heard it, right? The Teamsters, the United Auto Workers recently, the nurses, and for our members at these grocery stores, they've taken their first strike votes that people can remember. We have members who've worked in these grocery stores 30-something, 40-something years, and they have never taken a strike vote before, and they took them this year, and people were scared, because when you vote to go on strike, you are saying that you're going to remove your labor, which means that you're not going to get a paycheck, right? And for a lot of our members who are essential workers, who worked through the pandemic, who kept us all fed, they themselves live paycheck to paycheck. And it is a scary proposition to say, I am going to go on strike and potentially not get a paycheck and not be able to pay for my house and my food and my kids. That is a scary proposition. But our members did it anyways. They did it anyways because they know that they are worth more. And there is a feeling in the country right now where workers are saying that across the board, that we are worth more and that we should have more because of the work that we provide, whether it be a teacher, a nurse, or the grocery worker or the janitor who cleans those high-rises in downtown Minneapolis. And so, you know, there is a moment that we are, as labor, as a local, that we are building a movement from to be able to tackle the inequality that exists. Because our retail members, majority retail workers, 1 in 10 workers in Minnesota is a retail worker, and most of them are part-time, which means that those workers, those part-time workers, work 3 or 4 part-time jobs. That means folks are working 75 to 90 hours a week to make one 40-hour paycheck. And because you're a part-time worker, then you don't qualify for health insurance either, right? And so then you have no health insurance, and you have no retirement security beyond what you might be able to save on your 75 to 90-hour work week. And in meatpacking, it is more full-time, but you know, we just set the standard in Minnesota with this last contract. We went from like $20.60 to $23.60 in year 1 of this contract. $23.60 is still not a livable wage for 2 working adults with 2 kids. And so there are moments where it feels like, are we really going to get anywhere? And then there are moments where there is a surge and where there is possibility, and we have to figure out as organizations and as individuals how we take those moments and we seize those moments to build the movement that we need. And that has been an exhilarating challenge this last year. I'm very new to lead at the local. I'm 11 months as president, and so it's very new. And we were not prepared for these fights. We had no steward structure. We had no leader structure. It was a transition of president, last day of 2022, negotiations right after the new year, and we were not prepared. But you know who was prepared? Our members. Workers are amazing. Those members have been amazing. And they, even in the midst of saying, I might not get a paycheck and I might not be able to feed my kids, pooled together because there is love within our members. We all understand that we have to fight together, and there is love between us all. And that love meant that then we set up hardship funds. People talked to each other within the store. They figured out who needed bills to pay and who was going to pool their money together to help them pay it, together with other union members who contributed as well. And so that is also the way that we take on these things that feel insurmountable, that we depend on each other, that we depend on the love that we have for each other, and we build those relationships so that when those moments come, that we're ready, even if we don't have the infrastructure. And that has been the most amazing thing to see in this last year amongst the members of our local. And so I am like super excited to think about how we do that across our movements.
So I'll talk a little bit more about the work the Advocates does to try to abolish the death penalty around the world. But one of the things I think is really important for our work, and maybe is something for others to consider about their work, is defining issues and problems in the framework of human rights. Like, for me, it really helps to sort of not issue spot, but really drill down to what the core issue is. So with respect to the death penalty, we use this language that is very different from what it means in the United States. You have a right to life, and that's enshrined in international human rights instruments. And what that right to life means is not what it means here in the United States. It means the protection against arbitrary deprivation of life. And the death penalty is a form of arbitrary deprivation of life. So if you think about like immigration and immigrant detention, for example, there's this concept of arbitrary detention. And detaining someone because of their immigration status is a form of arbitrary detention. And there's actually a working group on arbitrary detention at the United Nations, and they're very interested in immigrant detention issues. They want to hear from advocates in the United States in particular about those issues so that they can sort of define and sort out what that means in the context of immigration. So if you start, or at least dedicate some time to thinking about what the human rights connection is to the work that you do, you're also connecting yourself to the universality of human rights. And that means that it's not just the fight that you're fighting today, it's that there are these fights going on all around the world. And that if you're conceptualizing things in the framework of human rights, others are as well, and you can, the Advocates for Human Rights is a member of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty. I just finished my third term as a vice president of the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty, and we're a coalition of over 160 organizations around the world that are all, from their own perspectives, in their own ways, they're all working to try to abolish the death penalty in every country in the world. But we see it as this fight against arbitrary deprivation of life. And one of the great things is if we can start with that framework, we open up a lot of opportunities to learn from each other as well, because different strategies gain different levels of traction depending on the communities where they are. So we have, really creative member of the World Coalition that's based in Taiwan. And they've had some really great strategies to try to shift public opinion in Taiwan about the death penalty. And we're able to learn from them. And they're able to sort of cross-pollinate with other abolitionist organizations. And different groups are doing different things, but there are ways that we can support each other, and there are ways that we can learn from each other. But because we all start out with that same human rights framework, it gives us sort of a common language to talk about. And also talking about rights of immigrants, it's not just in the United States that these fights are happening. It's happening all around the world. They're all different contexts, different audiences, different types, different political contexts, different public opinion challenges. But nonetheless, it's still a fight for human rights, and it's a fight for the human rights of people who are migrants. And there may be really good strategies to learn from in other contexts, or you can think about who those unusual allies are as well. Here in the United States, we have a great ally organization to try to abolish the death penalty in the United States called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. Grover Norquist is one of their spokespeople. So there are unusual allies that you can develop, and Grover Norquist probably doesn't view it from a human rights framework, and that's okay, but it can kind of broaden your perspective about who potential allies are, and we can share that information with our colleagues in other countries that are trying to abolish the death penalty as well. So a little bit of a perspective from a global lens.
Well, I think actually I'd like to follow up on that, because I think from all three of you, maybe a lot about what I heard was you were taking something that may be nationally focused, right? Like, let's say Dobbs or abortion rights generally, but all of you kind of also went through a narrow local focus, right? And Rena, you're talking about a lot of it is when you're actually talking to workers who are here. And I just wanted to just follow up a little bit about that. Like, how are you able to have these conversations when you're working with local communities about connecting this work to a larger vision, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I personally am trying to wrestle with is what is my place? What is my work, and how I place it into what I want my world to look like? But often, right, I think it all comes down to what we can do in front of us and with the people that we know around us. And I just wanted, if you had any thoughts about how are you able to take it local to Minnesota state courts, or to work with the local grocery store, that has workers that are suddenly worried about their wages, and how to have that conversation where they may never have even thought about themselves as part of a larger labor movement. And of course, with people who are individually fighting against the death penalty, but may not have put that framework in mind and how you connect that with that, if that makes any sense.
I mean, it's relationships. The soul of organizing is relationships. And it's relationships based on trust, right? And that is work. That is work to build. But they already naturally exist too. It is about putting resources and being intentional in really fostering and giving space for people to have those relationships and to figure out through those relationships how they're stronger, right? Through our shared narratives, through our shared stories, our shared struggles. And I think around immigration, I've had this conversation before with Michelle at the Advocates about how there are actually a lot of immigration remedies for folks, but people are afraid of stepping out and even taking the chance, right, to be able to even access them. And the way you move people there is by having somebody trusted actually have the conversation with them and bring them, sometimes physically bring them. And then once you have that first or those first few, then that grows. And that is the heart of organizing, that you start with that one-on-one conversation, that one-on-one relationship building, and over time, that trust grows, and over time that people then are able to have more control and choice over their lives because they've taken those steps. And also, nobody wants to feel alone, right? Like if you feel like you're by yourself, you're not going to do a thing. But if you are in relationship with one other person and that grows into a community, you are more likely and to take action and to feel brave, and that then inspires another group, another person to do it with you. And that is how we got to strikes, despite like having not done it for 30-something, 40-something years. Like every 6 weeks, we got to an escalation on strike with every new employer that we had negotiations with this year. And it was because at the core, it was our members and our member leaders being in deep relationship with each other and knowing that they were going to stand up for each other and hold the line for each other.
Yeah, and I 100% agree that it is about relationships. It just is. I mean, so when I describe where I'm situated in the work, I am the person who sues people, right? But how do I know that you need to, how do I know, like I said at some point, like the situation on the ground is dire? Well, how did I know that as a person who sues people? The only way I know that is because we are in coalitions with people who can tell me that. And I have to listen to them about what the struggle is like. So Gender Justice as an organization worked very hard and for many years leading up to the lawsuit, actually filing the lawsuit, and to be in coalition with abortion providers, with the local abortion funds, with advocates all over the state who are talking about reproductive justice. We have to listen to people about what their lives are like, what they need, and then be able to contribute our expertise to that effort, but not tell them what they need to do, right? Like listen to what they're saying they need, and then figure out how we can use our skills to make that happen. And similarly with the work on trans rights as well, we're in different coalitions listening to people who provide gender-affirming care, who access gender-affirming care. And then what I can do is tell them what I know about how insurance law works, right? So but you have to have a community of trust. You have to listen. You have to be willing to hear, no, you're misunderstanding me, without being too defensive about it, et cetera. So, yeah.
I guess I'll offer a little bit of a different perspective, but I want to build off it. I don't want to negate what's already been said, and that is that individual cases can open doors. So if you think about the issue of the death penalty and immigration, for example, the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty does a lot of work on this issue, on the rights of foreign nationals who are charged with capital crimes or sentenced to death. And that opens the door for new advocacy. For example, the government of Mexico is very vocal at the United Nations when it comes time for the United States to come up for its human rights review because of the Mexican nationals that have been sentenced to death in the United States and have been denied their right to consular access. I remember sitting in a conference in Malaysia, and there was a woman not too far from me, and she was from the Fijian embassy. Well, why was she attending this death penalty conference in Malaysia? There was a Fijian national who had been sentenced to death in Malaysia, and Fiji is one of the loudest advocates, one of the strongest advocates in the Pacific region for abolition of the death penalty. So she was there because of that one case, because of that one person who had been sentenced to death, but that opens up, really good opportunities for building allies and building that movement and to exert diplomatic pressure on governments. There was I forget which country it was, but there was a Nigerian who was sentenced to death. And Nigeria retains the death penalty, but the Nigerian government was really going to bat for their, what was a foreign national in that country who had been sentenced to death. They wanted to defend their rights, and they were pressing that government to respect the rights of that foreign national. So it does open up opportunities for advocacy, but it also opens up discussions, and you throw around the word intersectionality a lot, and it can get overused. But it's you look at the migrant workers in Qatar, some of whom were sentenced to death, and does that have to do with their exploitive labor conditions that may lead them into conflict with the law? You look at women in Southeast Asia and Indonesia who are sentenced to death for carrying certain quantities of drugs, and that may result in a mandatory death penalty. Well, these people who are in migration and coming into conflict with the law, there are sort of intersectional human rights issues related to that can connect it to the death penalty. And one of the really powerful things the World Coalition Against the Death Penalty has done, maybe not deliberate, but every October 10th is World Day Against the Death Penalty, and each year they choose a theme. And oftentimes these themes open up possibilities for new allies and for new conversations that we wouldn't already have. So we had, a couple of years ago, the theme was gender and the death penalty. So looking at women under sentence of death, it's a very small overall number, but there are so many issues of gender-based violence and gender discrimination and gender stereotypes that lead to women being sentenced to death around the world. And that has really opened up a lot of opportunities for advocacy with the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. We just had a side event with that committee last month to talk about women, gender, and the death penalty. We had, as a focus for World Day Against the Death Penalty a few years back, we looked at the children of people sentenced to death or executed, and the rights of those children to maintain relationships with their families, with their parents. And of course, that's also an issue that arises in an immigration context as well. So we had a World Day Against the Death Penalty several years ago where the theme was people with psychosocial disabilities. So looking at the disability rights movement and how that can intersect with people who come into conflict with the law who have psychosocial disabilities. So it really does open up opportunities to gain new perspectives and build new allies and have new conversations you wouldn't otherwise have.
Great. I think this serves as a nice segue into my next question, which is I think all of you have already identified all these different ways that your work and what you do can intersect or can be enhanced by working in other areas, whether it be immigration or whatnot. But my question is historically, and I think even now, there is still very much a scarcity mindset, right? I think you even see this in a very political way right now in the politics of right today, is that you see newspapers and pundits talk about how, abortion is a winning issue for the Democrats, right? What does that mean? Does that mean that every other issue don't talk about? I mean, I think as an immigration person, the kind of what I do hear sometimes is like, talk about abortion, don't talk about immigration, right? And it is very much a scarcity mindset. of how this works. Is like you know, and I think historically that has also been the case in some instances. And I just want to ask if you have any ideas that I think we can all agree that there are these wonderful areas of collaboration, but at the same time, I think we struggle with it. And if you have any thoughts or perhaps examples of how we can break through a scarcity mindset and find more ways to collaborate and work in conjunction with what I think we all share in many ways, what a vision of the America that we would one day hope to see would look like.
Yeah, I can start. I think, in the context of the death penalty, a lot of what this means is grappling with public opinion, and I think that relates as well to the question. And I always bristle a little bit when people are talking, want to raise public opinion, because human rights are universal and they're fundamental and they're not up to a vote. Like, they shouldn't be, and that's not how we should approach it. But nonetheless, we're living in a world where we have decision makers, we have voters, and all of that, and their opinions do matter. And sometimes, that means we need to listen to people who might be wiser than we are about how we frame issues with the public. I remember back in 2012, when I first started working at the Advocates for Human Rights, that was the year of the marriage amendment and the year of the voter ID amendment. And the Advocates was, part of that coalition, and we were told very specifically, this is not the time to talk about human rights. This is not the time to talk about rights. That's not the way you're going to move the conversation. And those of you who are here in Minnesota at the time, you know what the mantra was of the movement. It's about love and commitment. It's about family. And those were the messages that were proven to be effective and were in fact effective. So we also need to sort of lose our egos that it's okay to say this isn't the time to frame the issues in this particular way. And there are people who are, who do this and who know how to do the messaging so that it resonates with the people it needs to resonate with. But some of it, like another issue we deal with death penalty is this myth of deterrence. And governments will rely on that. They'll say, we need the death penalty because it deters crime. And we know, like, the research shows that the death penalty does not have any unique deterrent effect. But governments are always trotting out that argument, and we know that. So it's really frustrating because it's like pounding your head against the wall. They keep saying this, and just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. But one of the things the abolitionist movement was able to do is every March at the United Nations Human Rights Council, they have a debate on the death penalty, and they choose a topic every year. And so we got them to choose this deterrence argument as the topic a couple of years back, and they brought in experts, and all the experts said, they showed this is what the evidence shows. And so now when governments bring out that argument, we can say, yeah, remember that panel that the Human Rights Council held, and the conclusions of the panel were this. Like, you can keep saying it, but we have these experts who testified and explained, and you had the chance to give your own opinion, but this is what the worldwide experts conclude. And so we now have that as like ammunition to feed that back in the faces of the governments. On public opinion, that's another argument that governments trot out to say they need to keep the death penalty because the people support it. And the strategy that we have some coalition members who have been very, very good about addressing this public opinion issue by doing good opinion polling, like by enlisting universities to do really thoughtful, not just do you support the death penalty, yes or no, but giving them specific case studies that are actually taken from real cases of people who've been sentenced to death in their countries, and to say, okay, here's a scenario, would you support this person being sentenced to death? And given the actual context, people will say, no, this person shouldn't be sentenced to death. And then they'll give them another case study that's based in reality. And so that's a way to get more nuanced, sort of real world opinions that are more than just like an online survey, do you support the death penalty, yes or no? So that's something where, you have to be courageous to take that on, because there is a lot of public opinion that's problematic about the death penalty. But another thing we do in our advocacy at the United Nations in particular is push governments to educate the public. Because if they're going to rely on public opinion, that opinion should be well informed. And in countries like Japan, and Japan is always saying the public supports the death penalty, Japan is also really highly secretive about the death penalty. And so we try to call Japan's bluff to say, if you're going to rely on public opinion, that opinion needs to be well educated, it needs to be well informed. And so we've had some good luck in pressing governments that trot out the public opinion argument to better educate the public, to be more transparent and all of that. So just a few thoughts from the death penalty perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So I think, I think we're in like a really interesting moment for this when it comes to abortion in particular, because literally up until the 2022 election, every politician would have told you, you cannot win an election by talking about abortion. For Pete's sake, don't say the word abortion. We're going to lose. And it's extremely frustrating that, I mean, in some ways, obviously, losing the right from the U.S. Supreme Court made the issue salient in a way that it hadn't been for people before that. But in addition, I think the fear of, we're going to lose elections, we're going to lose elections, made people not investigate. Well, how do you talk about the issue in a way that does win you elections? And so I agree, with the opinion polling. So one of the other things that we did in preparation for this lawsuit that we brought in the state of Minnesota is we worked with a very high-quality polling organization to do polling and focus groups around the state. And, pay attention to how precisely do you talk about abortion in a way that changes people's minds, maybe? Or how precisely, how do you frame the issue in a way? I'm not going to be able to tell you how to do that. I sue people. I don't know how to, but you have to listen to the people who do the polling and tell you, this is the correct way to talk about the issue. And then, you, you have to trust yourself. It's just, I guess I'm trying to struggle out how to put it into words, exactly how I feel about this. But the state of Minnesota has never had a pro-reproductive rights majority in its state houses until this past election. It had not happened, and in part because everybody was afraid to talk about it. When we started investigating how to bring our lawsuit, we went around to every major law firm in the Twin Cities and said, please provide pro bono counsel. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, we're afraid to have the word abortion connected with our law firm's name. What are you talking about? Of course, we're not going to help you. And now they would all love to work with us, right? It's sometimes you have to ignore people telling you that this is a losing issue and try and work with groups of people to figure out how to tell your stories in a more effective way. And the same thing, for our work on trans rights, one of the things that we are doing is we are bringing a lawsuit in North Dakota state court because of North Dakota's bans on gender-affirming care that are in place right now. And we're being, that's a real risk, right? You can lose that lawsuit, but where are you if you don't even try? You're nowhere if you don't even try. And as part of that effort, we have put money into focus groups of North Dakota people to how do you talk about trans rights in a way that people will listen to. And, it's too early for me to talk about what I'm sharing, but holy cow, the results are surprising. So, there are ways to talk about these issues in a way that resonate with people and, build on our shared humanity. And how do you get the funding to do the focus groups? That's another scarcity mindset thing. So there's so much to talk about here, but I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
I love how the two of you talked about scarcity and the way that in the union we talk about it too, right? That scarcity is driven by fear. This, right? It is. That mindset is driven by fear, and it's driven by misinformation or lack of information. That is in labor in our union how we also talk about when we go to negotiate with the boss, right? Why does the boss win? Why is it that workers, when they have a fight, they're in negotiations or they're trying to form a union, the only reason that the boss wins and the workers lose is fear or misinformation. That is all. And that applies across the board, across the campaigns and the right and the justice issues that we all work on. And then we always try to help people think about and why. Why are folks driving this narrative of fear and misinformation? Who stands to gain from driving that fear and driving that misinformation? And I think if you just take those two questions and you ask every time, it is the folks with the money. It is the folks who want to keep the power and who don't want to share it. And so, it feels like amongst all of us, the only reason we ever lose is because of those things. It's the fear, it's the misinformation, and the only things that I have seen as an organizer in these years that pushes back against that fear and that misinformation is the love and the hope that workers have when they start talking to each other and sharing those experiences and understanding who is driving fear, who is driving misinformation, and that together they start dreaming about what it might be if they were to actually have power. And I think that's the case for all of us in all of our work based on what you've said.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating to hear about, fear, you talk about love, and then you also mentioned power, right? I think that's the other aspect of it, is what does it mean to empower? All of this work is work with people who are disempowered, right? The people who, if you're on death row, you are disempowered. You're about to lose everything in terms of agency. If you're a worker who is forced to work these part-time jobs and are afraid that each time an employer could fire you, it's because you don't have power. Mm-hmm. If you are a woman who are facing abortion restrictions and not being able to choose your own reproductive you, right? Or if you're a parent of a trans child and having to worry about whether or not your child can have that, that's all a matter of feeling disempowerment. So of course fear drives a lot of that. I want to give an opportunity for people to have questions or comments, and then we can I think we can wrap it up and have the next panel soon too. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Yes, Craig.
I heard a sermon this summer where the pastor told us, she said, scarcity is the foundation of white supremacy. And it's really helped me get a different idea of when we fight that argument that there's not enough or there's a zero-sum game. And it's been really helpful for me to put it in that framework and both give me courage to fight against it, but also to think of avenues like and I thank you all for the ideas you gave me, but just wanted to share that with your responses.
Yeah, I think borders are born out of scarcity, right? I think that's absolutely what's happened, and I think it's really important to think about that. As mentioned at the beginning of the day, but if some of you have joined us late, I think part of the whole program are ways to encourage people to think and share about creative ideas, and I think one of the things we really want to push out there is that we want creative ideas and thinking out of the box and ways that we could really, break through the fear, break through some scarcity, and really feel a little bit more power as we face a pretty scary future. And we're always looking for a community to build that with. And I think if you guys have any thoughts or anything you'd like to share, and you can write them down or you can share at all, and that's something that we would love to hear from all of you. And I will tell you personally, I think hearing new ideas and hearing these people talk and hearing everyone is really something that helps inspire me, and it helps really inspire the idea that, this work is worth it, no matter how hard it might be. So thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next panel. Thanks, everyone.